The conversation around the Detroit Lions has suddenly shifted toward one question that could have major implications for the team's Super Bowl hopes, and it all starts with the uncertainty surrounding Kerby Joseph. Right now, there are plenty of rumors, plenty of speculation, and plenty of ideas being thrown around by fans about what the Lions should do at safety. One name that has been mentioned is Grant Delpit from the Cleveland Browns. But before anyone starts talking about trades, draft capital, or major roster moves, there is one critical factor that the organization appears to be waiting on. Everything comes down to Kerby Joseph's health. As things stand, there simply is not enough information available to justify making a significant move. The Lions know exactly what is happening with Brian Branch and understand the timetable surrounding his return. The bigger unknown is Joseph. Training camp is expected to provide the answers everyone is waiting for. Can he handle the workload? Can his knee respond properly after extended football activity? Can he participate consistently without setbacks? Those questions have not been answered yet, and that is why any discussion about bringing in outside help remains on hold. If Joseph proves that he is healthy and ready for the season, the urgency disappears almost immediately. But if training camp reveals lingering issues, the situation changes dramatically. At that point, Detroit would be looking at a significant concern in the secondary, especially considering the current circumstances surrounding Branch. The Lions are not a rebuilding team anymore, they are trying to win a Super Bowl. That reality changes how every roster decision is viewed. If there is a major hole in the secondary and a legitimate opportunity to fill it, Detroit would have every reason to explore options. Not only could a player like Delpit become a possibility, but the front office could also begin evaluating other available safeties capable of providing competition and depth. For now though, patience is the smartest approach. Another fascinating storyline developing behind the scenes involves the backup quarterback position. What makes this situation interesting is that there was never supposed to be a competition in the first place. The expectation was straightforward. Teddy Bridgewater would arrive, provide veteran leadership, and serve as the clear number 2 quarterback behind Jared Goff. Then Luke Altmyer entered the picture. According to reports from within the organization, Altmyer has impressed coaches. He has impressed Dan Campbell. He has impressed the offensive staff. And perhaps most importantly, he has put himself into a conversation that few expected him to enter this early. The debate is suddenly becoming very interesting. Would you rather have a veteran nearing the end of his football journey, or would you rather invest in a young player who might still have significant upside? That is the question facing Detroit. Just because a player entered the league without being drafted does not automatically limit his potential. NFL history has repeatedly shown that talent can emerge from unexpected places. The Lions have every reason to evaluate this carefully. There is also the financial side of the equation. A young, undrafted quarterback comes at a much lower cost than an established veteran. In today's NFL, managing the salary cap is almost as important as evaluating talent. Every dollar saved at one position can be used to strengthen another area of the roster. Still, nobody should rush to conclusions. Training camp excitement can be misleading. Every year, players generate headlines during off-season practices. Every year, fans hear about breakout performances. And every year, some of those stories disappear when preseason games begin and the competition becomes real. The true test will come when the lights turn on and the pressure increases. That is why the quarterback battle remains one of the most intriguing developments to monitor over the coming weeks. Looking at the bigger picture, expectations for the Lions remain extremely high. The belief around the team is that the floor sits around 10 wins, while the ceiling could reach 13 victories. The NFC remains highly competitive, but Detroit is still viewed as one of the conference's strongest contenders. The expectation is not simply making the playoffs anymore. The expectation is competing for the division. The expectation is earning a top seed. The expectation is making a serious postseason run. That mindset alone shows how far this franchise has come under Dan Campbell. The conversation is no longer about whether Detroit can compete. The conversation is about whether Detroit can finish the job. And when you examine all of these storylines together, the uncertainty surrounding Kerby Joseph, the emergence of Luke Altmyer, the possibility of future roster moves, and the championship expectations, the Lions are entering training camp with several unanswered questions that could define the entire season. The biggest question may not be whether Detroit is talented enough to contend. The biggest question may be whether the team can get the health and stability it needs at the right time to make a legitimate Super Bowl push. So as training camp approaches and the pressure begins to rise, let me ask you this. If Kerby Joseph is not fully healthy when training camp gets underway, do you believe the Lions should immediately pursue a trade for another starting caliber safety? Or should they trust the players already on the roster? The reason these questions matter so much is because the Lions are no longer operating like a team hoping to sneak into the playoffs. Every decision is being viewed through the lens of a franchise that believes it can compete for a championship right now. That is exactly why discussions about potential trade deadline additions have already started, even before the season officially gets underway. Detroit currently has financial flexibility available, and that gives the front office options if the right opportunity presents itself later in the year. Rather than making a massive splash move immediately, the organization appears comfortable evaluating the roster as it stands today and allowing players to prove themselves on the field. When people ask why the Lions have not made a blockbuster move, the answer is actually pretty simple. There is no obvious move that makes sense right now. A trade only works when the value matches the cost. The Lions could certainly dream about acquiring elite players, but every major acquisition comes with a price. Draft picks, salary cap implications, and future roster construction all have to be considered. Detroit has spent years building this roster carefully, and the front office is not likely to sacrifice that approach without a compelling reason. However, that does not mean they will remain inactive forever. If the Lions find themselves near the top of the NFC standings later in the season, and a struggling team becomes willing to move an impact player, Detroit could become one of the most aggressive buyers before the trade deadline. A single addition could be enough to strengthen a weakness and elevate an already talented roster, and that possibility becomes even more interesting when discussing positions that could become concerns during the season. Safety remains one of those areas depending on the health of Kerby Joseph. The defensive line is another unit worth watching closely. That brings us to one of the more surprising discussions surrounding the roster: potential cut candidates. Interestingly, there are not many obvious surprise cuts on this team. The roster is relatively stable compared to previous years. Most of the key contributors have clearly defined roles, and many roster battles are focused on depth positions rather than starting jobs. But one name that creates an intriguing conversation is Levi Onwuzurike. If healthy, seeing Onwuzurike released would shock many people. The reason is straightforward. The Lions could use his presence along the defensive interior, and the organization has continued to believe in his potential despite the setbacks he has experienced throughout his career. Injuries have repeatedly interrupted his development, preventing fans from seeing the consistent production many expected when he first arrived in Detroit. Yet the talent has never been the primary concern. Health has been the issue. If he can stay available, there is a legitimate opportunity for him to contribute in a meaningful way. That is why many within the Lions community are hoping this season finally becomes the breakthrough year that has been delayed for so long. And speaking of players whose careers could take an important turn, there may be nobody more fascinating to watch than Ennis Rakestraw. When discussing potential X factors for the 2026 season, plenty of fans immediately think about established stars. They think about the players already making headlines. They think about the names everyone expects to perform. But sometimes the true X factor is the player nobody is talking about enough. Rakestraw fits that description perfectly. Since entering the league, injuries have limited his ability to establish himself consistently. As a result, expectations have become more cautious than they once were. Yet it is easy to forget that Detroit invested a second-round pick in him because of the talent he displayed before reaching the NFL. The ability has never been questioned. The challenge has simply been getting him on the field. If he can finally remain healthy, his impact could be significant. The Lions secondary has battled injuries and inconsistency over the last several seasons. A healthy and productive Rakestraw could provide exactly the kind of boost that unit has been searching for. Imagine the effect that could have. A healthier secondary, more reliable coverage, greater flexibility for the coaching staff, more confidence throughout the defense. Those improvements could completely alter the trajectory of the unit, and that is why training camp feels so important this year. There are multiple players on this roster who have the talent to change Detroit's outlook, but their ability to stay healthy will determine whether that potential becomes reality. Levi Onwuzurike falls into that category. Ennis Rakestraw falls into that category. Kerby Joseph falls into that category. Even the backup quarterback battle falls into that category because the Lions need to know who they can trust if adversity strikes during the season. When you step back and look at the entire picture, one theme keeps appearing over and over again. The Lions already have the talent necessary to compete with anyone in the NFL. The biggest variable may not be talent at all. It may simply be availability. If key players remain healthy, Detroit has every reason to believe it can challenge for the top of the NFC. If injuries become a major issue again, difficult decisions could arrive quickly. The margin between those two outcomes may be smaller than many fans realize. As training camp gets closer, every practice, every update, and every health report will carry enormous importance because the answers to those questions could shape everything that follows. One aspect that cannot be overlooked when discussing the Lions' chances this season is the culture that has been built inside the organization. For years, Detroit was viewed as a team trying to figure out how to become relevant. Now the conversation is completely different. Expectations are higher because the roster is stronger, the coaching staff has established credibility, and players genuinely believe they can compete with the best teams in football. That belief matters. When a team enters a season expecting to win, every competition becomes more intense. Every roster battle becomes more important. Every practice rep carries greater value because players know they are fighting for opportunities on a team with legitimate championship aspirations. That is why some of the most important developments during training camp may involve players who are not receiving national attention. Everyone already knows what Jared Goff brings to the offense. Everyone knows what Jahmyr Gibbs can do when he gets the football. Everyone understands the impact that Aiden Hutchinson has on the defensive side of the ball. The real difference makers could be the players fighting to establish themselves behind the scenes. That is where the conversation returns to names like Luke Altmaier and Ennis Rakestraw. If Altmaier continues developing and proves he can handle NFL competition, the Lions could potentially solve an important backup quarterback question for years to come. Having a reliable young quarterback behind Goff would provide stability and flexibility moving forward. At the same time, if Rakestraw finally enjoys a healthy season, the secondary could look significantly different from what many people are expecting today. Depth often determines how far teams go in the playoffs. Not star power, not headlines, depth. The teams that survive deep into January are usually the teams that can withstand injuries and continue performing at a high level. Detroit understands that reality better than most. Injuries have affected this roster before, and the organization knows how quickly a promising season can become more complicated. That is another reason why potential trade discussions remain relevant. Even if the Lions do not make a major move before the season begins, circumstances can change rapidly. A position that appears